And now we get to one of my favorite parts, which is method. Oh my gosh, method. Sounds so boring. It isn't. The way to ensure consistency and winning is to be methodical about your approach to innovation. Let's dive in. This is not about opportunity hunting, it's about the stage after. But as a recap, what would have happened in a method that is related to innovation is that we would have identified not ideas that are inspiring, not mega trends out there that are inspiring, but clusters and insights, gaps where you can see multiple examples suggesting an overlooked consumer need. If it was about a consumer packaged goods product and you looked around and you saw caffeinated soda pop, caffeinated potato chips, and caffeinated bubble gum, then your cluster might be something like, hey, maybe there's an overlooked opportunity of caffeine alternatives, or shortness on time, a desire for energy, a different segment of non-coffee drinkers. And so we would take that insight and then move to our next step. Today is about the next step, and again, if you want to dive more into finding the first opportunity, that's in the last module. Now that's a lot of caveats, so let's get into adaptive innovation then. We're going to talk about 5 steps. Step 1 is defining a clear consumer need, then ideating like it matters, refining the ideas in a smaller team, creating rapid prototypes, testing, optimizing, and repeating that entire process. For step 1, push yourself on what are you actually trying to solve? What is the actual problem? And the old Einstein quote is if I had an hour to tackle a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and just 5 minutes thinking about the solution. If I use different classic examples, Smith Corona thought they were trying to be the best typewriter company in the world. Xerox mistakenly thought that they were in the world of making the best photocopiers. Blockbuster thought they were actually in a retail business making money from snacks because movie money went to Hollywood, and Kodak thought they were in a game of making a better quality print than Fuji. If we reframe the problem though, and we thought about the need they were actually solving for consumers, Smith Corona was helping humans record thought. Xerox was helping to replicate information and distribute it. Blockbuster was in the entertainment business, and Kodak was actually about recording visual memories. If those companies defined their problem differently, they would have had a better chance iterating themselves out of the situations they were in. And guess what? Smith Corona invented the laptop word processor and sold computers. Xerox invented the personal computer. Blockbuster pioneered online video streaming. And Kodak invented the digital camera. But because they didn't define their problems appropriately, their teams didn't take the ideas as seriously. Let's move to step 2 then. In step 2, what you're trying to do is find a way to develop 100 ideas methodically. And we're gonna actually go through this in our examples today. We're gonna go through several strategies for how to come up with ideas, but you're trying to push harder and harder and harder because this section is everything. You're trying to find ways to innovate with your team where you can defer judgment, where you can encourage wild ideas, where you can get a large volume of ideas, where you can actually have one conversation at a time and not people overly explaining each of their ideas, where you brainstorm in a way where you just say the headline and where you springboard off of ideas. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that list because I'll tell you that it's not easy. And I'm going to show you how having multiple sets of rules in brainstorming can be a tactic that enables you to extract better thinking from yourself and your team. Next up, refining your ideas. Note that your first ideas will always be an awkward baby, and that groupthink is your enemy. If you imagine the product or service your company is the best at, whatever that hero product is, you're probably so good at it because you've done 100 iterations of it. You've tested all around that one great product. But in a time period of chaos, it's very important to note that the consumer needs shift and they evolve. And maybe that testing you did is no longer as relevant. Maybe that research you did last year just doesn't apply as much this year. And so what we're now trying to do is find ways to test and ideate things where the first idea is going to be awkward. It's going to be some little idea suggested from a new millennial worker on your team, and when you hear it, you're going to react and say, no, we've already tried that. That's not where the market is. Those are the breakthrough ideas. So how do we break through some of that? High level, you're trying to get to your 100 ideas by sourcing from all different groups. But when it comes time to filter, you're not trying to do that by consensus or everyone will just vote the products that look closest to what you currently are good at. You're trying to get a much smaller group that is maybe a bit more trained like yourselves in innovation to look at new ideas and think about what could be your outliers, what could be your blue oceans or black swans, depending on what your favorite book is out there. When you then want to go from 10 ideas to 20, you would not use a small group of people to refine. You'd actually try to find different ways to test or to continue to evolve the very best ideas so that what you're actually doing is giving those ideas as much of a chance as possible. And potentially you're actually making 10 beautiful prototypes that you could rank order or actually take a couple of and test in a real market situation. Step 4 is about prototyping. I was working on a project, and it was a Stanford D-School project that was related to helping reinvent a gas station store. And I remember that in this project, to define the problem, we spent 6 hours hanging out in gas station stores. And I thought, I already know who hangs out in a gas station store. It's everyone. People come in and out of a gas station. But when we spent our time, we noticed there was one group, teenage boys, and for them this is the ideal store. It's where they group shop and spend their parents' money. So when it came time to actually test and prototype a gas station that was targeted towards teenage boys, we didn't have the money or time to make a real gas station. That's a tough thing to do. So instead, what we decided to do is we mocked up prototypes of gas stations with physical products, projections of what the products might be, testing all of our concepts in one place. It turns out that if you try to make a gas station for teenage boys, you're probably going to try and make something that will insult other groups of stakeholders. Just straight up, that's the only way to truly target teenage boys. And so instead of building a whole gas station, we mocked one up. And we had real people from the street come into our mocked up gas station. And I remember a 50-year-old mother who came up, and I said to her, what do you think about this gas station? And I thought she would tell me, I'm insulted by this. But what she actually said was, I like it. And I thought, that's a really weird reaction. Why do you like it? And she goes, well, it's dirty, but in a different way. And she said, when I go to a gas station, normally it's all dirty and I got to get a bottle of water and clean it off. Here, it's not. So that's fine. So I said, okay, would you shop here more? And she goes, no. Would you shop here less? No. Why? Why doesn't it impact you at all? Well, because I don't care where I get my gas from. But meanwhile, for the teenage boy, there's nowhere else they would otherwise go. Now, the reason I tell you that story is that none of that insight would have really come up without making a prototype. And sometimes your prototype can involve real people off the street, but other times it can be how you mock things up for the rest of your team. Creating diagrams, making frameworks, making a physical mock-up of a product or a service, creating a slideshow or an experience, making a model of how something might work, or a 3D rendering, maybe even a sample advertisement. If you're innovating something about your office culture, create the experience as a skit. The point is, humans are much better at physically experiencing it. And that's why I don't even want to teach this example in slides. I wish we were in real life where I could do an actual workshop with you, because it makes a really big difference for people to experience and play with your rapid prototyped idea. Next up, you need to find the method of testing that would work best for your brand. And it doesn't always have to mean creating a product and putting it in stores. Maybe you don't even need a product, but you run 2 sets of ads and you see who clicks more on the other ad. Maybe you make 2 Kickstarters and see who buys one product versus the other. At Capital One, we would test 10 to 100 different products every month. And little context, I ran analytics and then the high-end team and innovation in Canada. And I'll go into some of how we looked at that world in our next module. But every single month we had 10 to 100 ideas. What was interesting is we would test value propositions, prices, promotion strategies, how you articulate a product, colors. And what we had is such a huge pipeline for new ideas that you didn't care about someone's idea sounding weird. You would just decide to test it. And maybe that new millennial on the team has a great idea, but it sounds awkward to you. Cool, test it. And by pushing your boundaries on testing, sometimes you'll be surprised. At Trend Hunter in 2006, as we developed our layouts, we used to test new layouts every hour. We ran real-time tests perpetually, and none of the newspapers were doing that. So by 2007 and 2008, we were getting hundreds of millions of views, on track for billions of views, and more traffic than almost every newspaper on the planet. And I can tell you, I looked at their websites every day, and they didn't change. People used to change their website once every 6 months or so. And by testing and developing new ideas, I could very quickly fine-tune where things are going. At Dell and Amazon, there's a lot of case studies on how they do real-time testing and pricing on their products in a way where some of the pricing is on autopilot. And there will be active pricing tests that don't happen and then have someone sit down 2 weeks later to look at. The tests are just perpetually happening. And then based on how the market's reaction goes, the actual prices will change in real time. And these are just different ways of thinking about your testing strategy where it's not necessarily about the 1980s or 1990s world of making a big, beautiful product and putting it in the store for a year and seeing how it benchmarks versus another. It's about calculating the size of the risk of your bet and figuring about what's the fastest, most minimal viable product way of testing my new idea. Then we get to the end, we check the results, we repeat, and the process continues. This wraps up my section on the high-level process. I know it's a lot more tactical than my normal story-filled way of telling you stories. And so I'm going to give you a workshop question that's a bit of a curveball to reflect the fact that I'm making you work and making you think a bit harder today. My curveball is simple. How much does winning and/or getting it right actually matter to you? And my guess is that if you're like me, if you're tuned into this workshop, you're probably already a very high-performance, creative individual who invests in your own learning, you care about the idea, but you're looking for those incremental little things that could take your idea from good to great. So with that said then, remember that little example of the iPhone, and I hate to quote the iPhone because it's almost cliche how often people look at it as an example, but I love looking at how an idea that was so similar to all of the other products around it could cause the market leaders to just dismiss it. They were trying to focus on buttons that would look good enough to lick. I don't think they're going to figure it out. Some rapid fire on tactics. I'm going to give you 7. You might want to screenshot this when I get through it, but just very, very quick rapid fire on your tactics would be set the stage for innovation. Invite the best people, maybe cross-functional people from different teams, create a useful space, and actively try to sort of break the ice in ways that make innovation fun. Next, focus. Create a very specific question that you're trying to work on. Mix up the rules. I'm going to show you some case studies on how to do it, but change the rules of brainstorming in order to make it like a game, enjoyable, and also get those sort of asymmetric thoughts out. Seek flexibility, so push for a range and variety in the ideas. If you see people focus too much in one concept area, push them harder, throw them a curveball. Keep it fun, add a little salt and pepper with some unexpected questions or diversions. Challenge your group with a specific problem, and make sure to wrap it up. So at the end, get people to vote for their favorite ideas, bring closure to them, and in some workshops that we'll run, sort of like a competition or a hackathon, we would actually give people a couple days to take their idea from a workshop, turn it into a pitch competition that might go ahead of a senior leader. And you'll be surprised at how much distance an idea can take from a half-hour workshop that maybe people did over a lunch hour to 3 days later when they pitch it in front of their CEO. And that wraps up our module. See you in the next lesson.